Today on the channel, I'm going to interview Steve Rosen, the author of Tone Chaser. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got something really exciting. We've got Steve Rosen on Zoom with us today. We're going to do an interview. I'm here in Nashville, Tennessee. Steve's out in California, and thanks for meeting with me early this morning. Steve, I know it's early out there for you on the West Coast. Kind of early.
Yeah, man, kind of early. Tell that to my cat, Overdub, and tell him to quit waking up at 4:30 in the morning and refusing to go back to sleep until I fed him for will be the first of 20 feedings during the day. But so yeah, man, I'm up early and ready to rock here, pal.
That's cool. That's cool. As a fellow pet owner, I understand completely. Well, for those of you not in the know or that have not really been paying attention for the last couple of years, Steve Rosen is the author of Tone Chaser. I've got a copy of the book right here. It's a huge book, and we're going to talk about this today in this interview and Steve's experiences being a close and personal friend and ally with Edward Van Halen. This is my first time I've had really to dig in and chat with Steve about some stuff, we'll just kind of go from there. So I've just got the book, Steve, so I'm digging into it. I just finished up Brothers. I got that first, and I'm digging into your book, and I'm enjoying it so far. And one thing that I wanted to call out is you considered yourself an ally of Eddie Van Halen. So tell me more about that. You 77 was kind of the time frame. So you got to know Edward when they were about to break through on the other side, right? When things were getting really good, right? So
Exactly.
tell me a little bit more about that ally relationship.
Well, before I go there, Marty, I wanted to reference back. So you just finished Brothers, and I don't know if you noticed, but Alex actually references me by name 3 times. He does not mention the name of the book. He's also cited some other authors, and he mentions them, but he doesn't mention the titles of their books, whatever. But there's also about, I don't know, half a dozen or so of the quotes in there, which aren't credited to me, which are mine. Which came from my interviews, which are in the hardback book, and which you can hear in Edward's voice in the audiobook. That being said, so I meet Edward on a Friday night, July 1977. Cheap Trick is recording a live record at the Whiskey, which is the famous Whiskey on the Sunset Strip, holds about 200 people. Where Van Halen, they really kind of made their bones. They sort of rose up the ranks. They played the Starwood, which is a pretty kind of hip club off of Sunset Boulevard, and then they were playing Gazzarri's. And if you were a local band and you wanted to play the Whiskey, I mean, the Whiskey had that pedigree. I mean, everybody from Zeppelin to Cream, Spirit, Alice Cooper, every band had played there. All the English bands coming over played there because there weren't that many places for these bands to play. So it's a Friday night in 1977, and I'm introduced to Edward by Michelle Meyer. Michelle is the girl who booked the Whiskey. And I knew Michelle because I had a band at the time named Deluge. And, I was trying to play around, and she had booked my band into a couple other clubs she booked, So I was like very beholden to her. I love Michelle. She was great. She says, "Hey, there's this guy you've got to meet." So we walk upstairs in the whiskey dressing room, and I see this guy standing in the corner. So you have to remember, July 1977, as you mentioned, their record was still 8 months away, right? That first record wouldn't come out till February 78.
Right.
They were a local band made good, basically. They had signed the deal with Warner's by the time I met him, but they were still kind of a local phenomenon. There
Right.
weren't a
Right.
lot of pictures about out there on them. They weren't in magazines. So I'm pretty certain that I recognized this guy standing in the corner there. It's possible I may not have recognized him because also at that time I had never seen Van Halen perform live. So, which is strange because I was at the Whiskey and the Starwood every single week. I mean, I was at those clubs a lot. Somehow I never saw them. We meet and we start talking, and it just it's one of those chemical things. I don't know what it is. You just feel connected. I don't want to sound cosmic. You just feel
Yeah.
comfortable around somebody. You feel that you can trust this person. And I had that feeling for many, 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 many years with Edward. And you brought up that term ally, and I think that's a great word because I think what Edward sensed in me was someone who, because I really wasn't in the business per se, I was a music journalist, but it's not like I was another guitar player. I mean, I was, but not on
Yeah.
that level. So he could really talk to me, and I don't honestly ever think he kind of thought of me as a music journalist. I mean, he knew that's what I did. We did a lot of interviews together, but I think it was more just a friend, and
Yeah.
he did feel comfortable around me. And with Edward, respect and trust were everything. And when you call someone an ally, well, what is it? It's somebody you trust and somebody you respect. So I think that was there from the first time we met.
Yeah, I know that was really important. I've read so many, hundreds of interviews with Eddie, and one common thread that I can say through his career in his life, no matter whether it was early or in his later years, trust and connecting to people and that bond was extremely important to Edward. I know Eddie had everybody and their brother pulling at him at all times, especially at the peak of their fame, and every celebrity handles that differently, clearly. But with Eddie, trust and a solid friendship was the was critical. And I think that I can only assume based on what Alex said in his book, but the way they were raised, they were almost like outsiders to begin with,
Mhm.
and the way that they were treated growing up, they had each other, and I think that was a defense mechanism. And when they kept their circle very tight, very close. I know a lot of fans would get frustrated throughout the years that Van Halen would never release new material or new information on material. You only knew if they wanted you to know, kind of thing. They held their cards very tightly, and if you were in that circle, from the people I know within the Van Halen community, if you're in that circle, it's a small circle. And it's built on trust and respect. So it's very awesome that you were able to establish that early on and create that bond. So you were a journalist, but you said you were in a band as well.
Yeah, I had a couple bands kind of back in the day. I mean, more than anything, I wanted to be a guitar player in a rock and roll band.
Yeah,
I wanted to be a songwriter and a guitar player. I realized early on that I was never going to be a great guitar player. I mean, but I was okay.
yeah,
But I think what I brought to the guitar playing was I understood about songwriting, and I started to write songs pretty early, and the songs are pretty good. They weren't amazing, but I think for a kind
yeah,
of a newbie songwriter, they were pretty good, and I really thought that could have developed. I always needed to find a singer because I couldn't sing a
yeah,
freaking
yeah.
to save my life. So I needed a singer. I needed that input, someone to help me with melodies, lyrically, even though I could come up with that stuff. But yeah, I had bands back in the day, and
Well,
we
that probably helped you with your connection with him, in some way. You were in that mindset, so you guys could kind of speak the same language, but you were different enough where you had sometimes having some differences with people is a good thing. You don't want to always run with the same pack, so to speak. You want to have different perspectives and friends with different interests, but you had that common thread to a degree, I guess you could say. So there was
Right.
that.
Absolutely. And I think Edward did respect that. Because remember, there was actually a few times that I would actually play guitar in front of him, and that was, that would curdle anybody's brain, When I play and then I remember some conversation, he goes, "Yeah, man, you're a guitar player, you get it." So he didn't say you're an amazing guitar player. He also didn't say you're a horrible guitar player, but he recognized it. And yes, as I mentioned, I really understood. I understood guitar players. I understood
Yeah,
the mechanics of recording and overdubbing and parts and building up that B section before the chorus and the
yeah.
release and lyrically and how the melodies would sit over those chords. I understood all that stuff, and I could speak to Edward on that level, and I think he appreciated that.
So you meet Eddie, through the whiskey, right?
Yeah.
And they break and you guys became friends. Did you guys have each other's phone numbers? Did you go to his house? Is it that type of thing that was frequent and you just sort of became, the sidekick in many ways? Is that
Yeah, man, I was the way lesser known sidekick. So at the end of this conversation at the whiskey, and it could have gone on for a while. I tend to think it was a half hour, 45 minutes. It could have been an hour and a half. We're talking about Clapton. Turns out, he was a
yeah,
huge Clapton guy. I was a monster Clapton cream guy, and Jeff Beck and Blackmore. I mean, these guitar players that I loved. And at the end of the conversation, he kind of just runs out of the room, and
right.
I'm kind of standing there, and my brother's there. We're kind of looking at each other, and he comes back, and he's got a piece of paper in his hand and a pen, and he's writing something down. He hands it to me, and it's his phone number. He goes, "Man, I really like talking to you. Call me sometime." So you have to also understand, man, I had never heard him play. I knew that he was on Warner Brothers. One of my regrets to this day is not calling him the next week, because
Yeah.
I know that we could have hung out a lot. I kind of couldn't bring myself to do it. I don't know why, but yes, it was like, I think by the end of that year, 77 or early 78, he had already come over to my house. I lived about 8 minutes away from where Edward lived. I lived in the Hollywood Hills in a beautiful area called Laurel Canyon.
hmm
That was kind of like the funky area. Bands like the Eagles and Joni Mitchell, Frank Zappa, they had houses up there. Edward
Cool.
lived in an expensive part of the Canyons over in Coldwater with Valerie. But we were just about 8 minutes away from each other, and so he would just pop over, and he would just come over, and he'd want to hang, and we'd talk about stuff, and he'd be smoking his cigarettes, and he'd pick up one of my guitars. I always had guitars in a rack in the room,
Yeah.
and it became close really quick, really swiftly. And people say, "Well, when do you think you became friends?" It's a hard question to answer. It's like one of those things, the drop of water into the cup, and you don't look, and all of a sudden it's overflowing, and you're not sure which drop made it overflow. It was kind of like that. Probably like any friendship or any intimate relationship you have with somebody. At what point is it your friends, and then
Yeah.
when you love this person? But I believe that it happened maybe even that first night. It was just this special thing, and I don't know how it happened. You
How
know,
much did you guys stay in touch with each other? When Van Halen 1 was released, obviously bands are on the road and Van Halen would tour a lot and I know that Ed for some time him and his brother lived with his parents, right? They didn't move out for a while.
no, no,
Right.
that's true.
It
They
was
were still
probably
living with their parents until I think the second record, which I just found astonishing.
yeah,
It
well,
was
and
like,
probably because they were living out of suitcases, and just
yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, so they had a little house in Pasadena, and in fact, I think it was maybe the first time when Edward actually came over to the house. I can't remember if it's the first time. It was before the second album came out, and he was still living in Pasadena. And I offered to drive out there. He goes, "No, no, I'll drive to you." And I go, "Edward, I'll drive out there." And uh, he wouldn't let me drive out to his parents' house. I mean, the drive from their house in Pasadena to where I was in the Hollywood Hills, I mean, it wasn't far, but it was a good 45
Yeah.
minute schlep, in California highway, freeway
He
traffic.
probably wanted to get out.
It could have been.
I understand it was a really tiny house. It was probably like, what are we gonna do? We've got like four rooms.
Yeah, yeah,
Let
yeah,
me go
yeah.
out to your place.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, man. So I think that friendship happened pretty early, and he'd come over, and one of the amazing moments, and you can hear it in the audiobook. You can read about it in the hardback book.
Hmm.
Um, uh, the second record hasn't come out yet. He comes over, he plays me a rough of the songs. Obviously, there were guitars. I think there were drums. There were no vocals. It was unmixed, and there may not have even have been any bass on it. And he had a cassette. Right, this is
Hmm.
cassette era,
Yeah.
right? We go out to his car, and he had this little piece of shit car, and he was so proud of it because he bought it with the money from the tour. It was like a $700, and real fans know this car. It was some kind of I don't know what it was.
It was like a little foreign, like
It's
compact car,
yeah, like
like
a Peugeot or
a
Renault
Peugeot or something. Yeah, right.
piece of crap. And I'm thinking, well, he's going to be pulling up in a Ferrari or something. So we go to his car and he puts it on and he's playing me these tracks, and I'm like, I'm blown away by it. He smokes. Edward smoked ferociously, horribly.
Yeah.
It was his worst addiction, but he's got the windows rolled up. It's a very hot day. He's got this fucking boombox cranked to 10. And I'm sitting there, man, and the smoke is filling the cab of this car. Cigarette smoke is a trigger for me. I used to get migraine headaches.
Oh
And
no.
I'm sitting there and I'm sweating and the note, and it's so fucking loud. But I'm listening to this going, oh my God, listen to this. And I'm trying in my head to keep track of it because I didn't know that we were going to listen to the tracks. I didn't have any pen and
Uh-huh.
paper to
Uh-huh.
take notes. We get done listening. We come back into the house. He picks up one of the guitars and he starts playing all of the songs I've just heard acoustically on the electric. And you want to hear something fucking brilliant. And the old maxim, it's in the fingers. Well, trust me, it's in Van Halen's fingers.
Oh yeah,
He's playing these
totally.
parts and he's saying, "This is how."
Yeah.
So that was a remarkable moment.
That's awesome. I remember in one of Dweezil's podcasts, The Running with the Dweezil, which is an awesome series. He talks about Eddie coming over, and I think it was Balance that he played him in his. He came in up to Dweezil's place in a Mercedes, and Dweezil said the same thing that it was full blast, and they sat and listened to the whole record, but it was numbingly awesome, but also excruciating. But I wonder if he was covered in smoke as well, like you were. Dude, that was the thing back in the 70s. Everybody smoked. I remember, I was born in 1970 and my parents smoked, and anywhere we went, it was you were just in this constant cloud of
No,
smoke in the
absolutely. I mean,
car,
I'd go out to clubs and I was like, please God, don't let me get a migraine. Or
right?
even you go to the record company and the
Yeah.
publicist will be smoking. And
And I think it's a European thing too, and a Scandinavian thing. I'm Scandinavian, and my dad was, full blood. We were my mom was Native American, but my dad's side of the family, and I know people smoke throughout the world. I'm not naive, but I think that, my dad being first generation American citizen and growing up, I can relate to some of the stories Ed and Al talk about with their parents and language barriers and just my dad the way he wasn't he I don't know if I would consider him an alcoholic, but I lost my dad at an early age to lung cancer, but smoking was just a thing. It was a way of life, especially in that generation. My dad was a World War II vet, so obviously he's gonna smoke. I mean, he was 45 when I was born, so people say your dad was a World War II vet. You're too young. I'm like, yeah, and my brothers were in the Navy during Vietnam, so
wow.
uh, you know, uh, I'm I'm experienced a lot of stuff when it comes to cultures and things. But anyway, enough about me. Well, I just wanted to relate that to smoking, and it's a bummer that we obviously, Eddie's ultimate demise, smoking was contributed to that. So,
It was
And he,
terrible. I mean, he always had a cigarette in his hand. He said, come over to the
yeah,
house,
yeah,
and if you're not used to smoking, somebody smokes in your house. I mean, I could smell it for
right.
weeks.
Or if you buy a
And
car that had a smoker in it, you're just like, nothing
yeah,
against people that smoke, all right? I mean, do your thing. I'm not trying to put anybody down, but you're right. You can just
yeah,
tell.
and I guess the real hypocritical part is I never said, Ed, don't fucking smoke in my house.
Hmm.
I hate it. It gives me a headache. And he would have respected it. He would have gone outside and smoked.
Yeah.
But I always felt uncomfortable asking him that, especially if he was coming
Yeah.
over to do an interview. I thought the whole,
Right.
flow of the day is gone, and it's like, I can put up with it while he's here. I'm sorry I never said anything. Look, not that my comments were going to mean anything to him.
Right.
It took him decades and decades to quit smoking. And even then, he still ended up vaping. So he kicked drugs and he kicked
Yeah.
alcohol.
Yeah.
He could not kick cigarette smoking.
How
But
did you keep up with Ed throughout the tours? Like when his life just went crazy, Van Halen 1, Van Halen 2, he played the album for you in the car, and then it was Women and Children First and Fair Warning, and then the Us Festival, and they did, Diver Down, and then you mentioned him living with Valerie, and at the time of 1984, Eddie was arguably one of the biggest rock stars in America, possibly the world, next to, other than like Michael Jackson, obviously. I mean,
mm-hmm.
MJ was the king, but you had a lot of big bands in that era. But how did your relationship continue throughout those years? Like how frequently did you meet up with him, and how easy or difficult was it uh, to stay connected with him? How often was it, and what was that like? Fill me in on that.
Well, so all those moments you're talking about, I mean, I go to in length in the book. And yes, when he was on the road, yeah, he'd be gone for months at a time. He'd call from the road once in a while, and
Hmm.
usually it was very late at night. And some of the conversations I've called the Twilight tapes in the book, because they would come at 2 in the morning or 4 in the morning and wanted to talk, or maybe he was homesick. Um, I can tell you those first two tours and the first two albums is when he was happiest. He was, again, he had gone from playing these 200-seater whiskey. It goes out on
Yeah.
that first tour and opens for Montrose and Journey. By the end of that tour, they're already hopping off doing their own
Yeah.
gigs.
Well, they'd proven themselves at that point. They were able to make it their life. But so you said it was the happiest times. Did he get increasingly more disenfranchised with it throughout, Women, Children First, Fair Warning? Did the industry start to wear him down, or is that what
No,
you're referring to, or was he just
no,
fatigued, or
no,
what?
no. He was uh, just as a reference point. It was those first two tours and the first two albums when everything was new to him. But Women, Children First, and my chronology is off here. Diver Down, even through 1984, he was incredible. I mean, he would talk about things that were going on, and there were fractures in the band very early. Look, he was never like friends with David Lee Roth.
Right.
They never hung out other than when they were on the road, And not that you have to be in a band and hang out with your bandmates, but they just came from two entirely different
Yeah.
worlds.
Yeah, they were cut
Um,
from totally different pieces of the cloth, man. Not even the
yeah,
same carpet, really.
right. But what led to those splinters was, again, going back to that respect thing. Edward was in there killing himself working on the Fair Warning record, and Ed's telling me Dave is off climbing a mountain somewhere. He's supposed
Right.
to be in pre-production. Trust me, Edward never forgot that. But there were cracks that were happening earlier, and
Yeah.
so they add up and they add up. But I think Edward handled it pretty well. I mean, he talked to me. about, again, pretty early on about, God, do you change members? He
Yeah.
wasn't so good. He realized that, that it was an ascent the band was on,
Did he
and
ever
that
show frustrations about Michael Anthony? I mean,
he did.
I've read things that he said, I'm not trying to dig up dirt. I love Mikey and I know he was integral in the band, but did you ever hear anything about Mike?
Yeah, there's a fair amount in the book. Look, I have to say that he loved Michael, and he said it many times, and he loved Dave,
Yeah,
but he didn't. He didn't think in Edward's head, and you have to understand that nobody was going to devote as much to that music as Edward did.
right.
Doesn't matter who you were. If you had given him 23 hours a day, maybe it wasn't enough, right? Because he was doing it 24 hours a day.
I can
But
relate
yes,
to that. I totally understand that mindset. And people that aren't in that position don't get it. And sometimes I have to take a step back working with other people that I work with and realize, they have lives. This is what I do all the time, no matter what. I have to. It's part of my DNA. And Eddie burned extremely hot all the time. And at that age, he was so inspired. I can see why. I can see why he would feel like that, especially when you have all that money on the line and all those commitments, becomes when you get some element of success, you're not just a bar band anymore and having fun. When you have four people in a band that are making potentially millions of dollars for a label and yourself, and you feel like one person could isn't pulling their weight or could destroy the empire quote you've worked on to establish. I can see where that would create some serious uh, issues, fractures. I guess that's how you put it. I mean, you see it with bands all over the place, like the Eagles, for instance, which is a different story altogether. But um, I can
yeah,
relate, so you saw that, you kind of saw those fractures early on.
I saw it a lot, and I mean, he wanted it to work with him, um, and he would reach out to Mike, and he said in the 7 years when he told me this, it was I guess the band had been together for 7 years, so that's like probably right around 84, 85.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
He said Mike has never called me once to come over and jam, and he wanted Mike to kind of bring more to the band song wise. And I said, well, he's probably intimidated. I mean, how could you not be intimidated? And he said, fuck him. It's been 7 years. Get over it.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
Edward thought. It didn't matter if Mike brought in, the next Beatles song. He just
Interesting.
he just needed Michael to go there, to go that extra little
Yeah.
bit, and that's also what he needed from Dave, because he was quick to point out, Dave, you know, had a lot to do with the band visually and the videos and the look and the feel. Obviously, as the front guy, I mean, he gives Dave his kudos, but he just needed more from those guys. But I can tell you that through 84, 85, 86, Sammy comes in the band. He's really happy. It's a reignited love affair. Loves
Super
what he's
inspired
doing.
time frame. Yeah.
Um, that happens. That goes
Yeah.
on for a couple of years. That flame fizzles out. I can, I felt through me. I mean, I could be entirely wrong, and I write about it, and I don't think I'm far off, um, because I'm experiencing his emotions as a friend, and not as band members or even family members,
Yeah.
right? I sensed a change in this extraordinary human being that I knew 90, 91, 92. Something was happening, and he was changing. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it could have been the singers coming and going. I think there was problems with the label. Maybe the marriage was in turmoil.
Music
Uh,
was changing a lot too around 92, you know, with grunge alternative and I think I can't remember a time in my life where I was more depressed musically when I found out Sammy left Van Halen. You know, I remember watching Twister and hearing the song Humans Being, and I thought to myself, this is the best stuff. My band, you know, they're my band. I felt like Eddie was my, you know, cousin or my brother. I felt that connected as millions of people probably felt that way. And I love that the Sammy Hagar era because I was 16 when 5150 came out. 15, you know, and that's my coming of age. I love both eras, I would say equally. Maybe a little lean more towards the Sammy stuff, just because I like that whole inspired vibe they had going on. But I sensed it too. You know, 93, they did the Right Here, Right Now live album, and Sammy kind of dissed on it. And that whole messy situation with Roth coming back, sort of. And I felt like my parents got divorced. I mean, I don't know what that feels like, but I guess if that, you know, as an analogy, that's kind of what I would think it would feel like. I felt like, man, Sammy and Ed are no longer Cabo Wabo drinking buddies, and you know, I had this vision of them in my mind that you know they they get together wearing their jams and hanging out, and that's kind of how it was in the early years. You know, they were and they grew up and grew apart. And I felt and then when I saw Eddie in '04, obviously the reunion tour was sad. I had a great time, but you know, I had passes for everything, and it was cool, but. To me, that was kind of the beginning of the end up until '07, you know, when Eddie and Wolfgang and the crew kind of. All right, sorry we got cut off there just a little bit, but I was talking about, you know, the '07 tour, and I got a chance, you know, to see that tour. And obviously, you know, Ed was top of his game in '07, I would definitely say. But you know, going back to earlier years, like we'll say post Diver Down Us Festival, '84, Valerie Bertinelli was, you know, his wife. We all thought Valerie was the cutest thing in the world, and we all had a crush on her. And I was jealous of Eddie because he had the talent and he was the rock star and he was my hero. It must have been surreal to be in that world to a degree. I mean, I would say I would have to think it must have been tremendous. What are some, have you got any cool little stories or, you know, things that we haven't read in interviews that you could tell us, you know, about Eddie and, you know, his, you know, the way he was around the house or when he'd come over or any funny little things that happened? I'm sure you've got thousands of them in the book, but
Yeah, man. Yeah,
give us some cool stories, man.
they are all in the book. None of this stuff ever came out in any of the interviews I did with him. That was all guitar talk, but all this stuff is in the book. So so I'm up at 5150. So Valerie, you know, Edward moved into Val's house. Valerie bought that house in Coldwater, which Edward would subsequently build a monster house with the studio.
Oh,
But
okay.
but you know, back I think she bought the house like 80, 81.
So that was
You know,
Valerie's property, and then Eddie built a bigger place, and then he
exactly.
built 5150. He just kind of came in and took over.
Yeah, exactly. So it's her house. Um, uh, so when went up to see Ed once he moved in, you know, I mean, she was around. Now she would be off doing her movies by then and that kind of thing. She had her own production company and everything. But she was as sweet as you can imagine. And yes, we were all enamored with her, and she was loving. And I saw that chemistry between the two of them, and it
Yeah,
was real, man. It was genuine. They adored each other. They cared about each other.
yeah.
Um,
Did she
at the
cook
same
food
time,
for him? Did they like have, were they like, you know, were they the typical couple where she was like, "Hey, I made some cookies or something." Did they
yeah, no,
live like?
it was never like that. I think she was always a little too busy to sit there and cook. But so
I
I'm
had
up
to
there one
ask.
time, and I would usually meet Edward in the studio, you know. But this time, when I talked to him on the phone, hey man, I'm going to come over. Hey, you want me to come over? Blah blah blah. He said, no man, I'll be in the house. Come by the house. So I knock on the door, and Valerie answers the door, which means he was in the house doing something. You know,
Yeah.
we weren't out in the studio yet. And so, apropos of nothing, she says, do you play Scrabble? And it's like she said, do you enjoy ice cream? I was a rabid Scrabble player. My mom was the best. And as a writer, journalist, man, I thought, well, no one's going to fucking beat me. I said, I love Scrabble. So she goes and grabs a Scrabble board, man, and empties out all the tiles, and we're doing our words. And I think Edward may have come out. I think he probably saw us playing. I think he probably just walked out to the studio. And we played for a while. You know, like a Scrabble game can
Right.
last a couple hours, especially with two people. And she was ferocious. And I loved that because she cared enough to invest everything she had in playing this game of Scrabble. You
Yeah.
know, she could
Yeah.
have said, hey, you know, let's play Scrabble. Edward's going to be busy for a while. And she could have gone through the motions, or she didn't have to do anything. And I would have sat there in the kitchen. But she was so into it. And I'll give away this little bit for all of you who are going to read the book. And if you haven't read the book, why not? I let her win. Not by much. And I thought, do not beat Valerie Bertinelli in Scrabble. That's not going to go on the plus side. So she was amazing. And let me backtrack just a little bit here, Marty. 1986, I've known Edward for about 8 or 9 years at that point.
Yeah.
Sammy has just joined the band. That 1984 record has come out. They're, like you said, arguably the biggest band in the world, certainly the biggest band in America.
Right.
He's arguably the most influential guitar player in the world. My thoughts are, my God, writers are going to come scrambling over themselves wanting to write his life story. I want to be the person to do that. I finally built up the courage, and it took me weeks and weeks and weeks of trying to get my head together. Hey, man, you're going to ask this person to write his life story. So I'm up at 5150, and I knew that was going to be the day. And I asked him, I go, Edward, hey, man, I know that a lot of writers are going to want to write your life story. I'd like to be that person. Thinking he's going to go off and think about it, which had been fair enough. And literally 30 seconds later, and a couple puffs of his cigarette, he goes, yeah, man, you know, it would definitely be you. Who else could it be, you know?
Yeah. Cool.
And we talk about respect, you know, it's like, oh my God. So fast forward about 4 years, I worked on that book for 4 years. That book never happened. The point being here, Valerie understood the importance of a book in sort of the legacy of her husband. And a book wasn't an album. And she saw the importance. And she said to me, man, you got to push him harder. And every week or so, I'd say, Ed, listen, man, we got to sit down. We got to do some more interviews for the book. You know, I need to find out more about your family, you know, what it was like when you were growing up, blah, blah, blah. And she says, man, you got to push them harder, you know, you really need to do the book. So she was really a champion of the book. She was amazing.
That's cool.
Another time I'm up there and she goes, oh, do you want a cat? I go, yeah, I love cats. I had cats, even though I had dogs growing up, but when I moved out, I always had cats, easier to take care of.
Yeah.
And so she had like this little pen of cats, you know, and I pulled this one up, this all black cat, which I ultimately named Valhalla, which I thought was so brilliant. Val for Valerie and Hala for Halen. Yeah. Little did I know, even though Edward had told me the story and I didn't remember, Mo Austin, who signed the band to Warner's, president of Warner's or chairman, I forget, initially wanted to call the band Valhalla. Oh. I didn't know that. I wasn't copying him. Mm-hmm. So those are pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I'm up at Edward's one time. We're in 5150, and he's taking the strings off a guitar. And I mean, you have to understand that 5150 is like the most extraordinary studio you've ever seen. I mean, there are guitars in stands, there are guitars on the ground, there are microphones, there are snare drums, there are cables. I mean,
video games.
Video games. It's amazing. He's restringing a guitar. He takes all the strings off, and he goes to one of these cabinets. You know, he's opening a cabinet. And he's looking, and he shuts it, and opens another one. He shuts it. You know, he's looking around. He goes, I don't have any guitar strings. I thought it was a joke, right? It's like going to a liquor store and they're out of beer, right? I mean, it's like, it's incredulous. You're in the studio with every conceivable piece of gear, and the outboard gear and the amps and the heads and the microphones. He doesn't have guitar strings. instead of like calling, one of his techs or roadie, hey, go bring me 100 sets of strings, he goes, let's go get some guitar strings. I look at him. So we go out, and the parking area around the studio was like this pretty massive parking area where all his cars were parked, which is where I would park. You come in the gates and you'd park your car. So we get into his Countach, this white Countach, right, with the scissor doors that come up.
Yeah.
He kind of jumps right in. It took me like 20 fucking minutes to get in, trying to maneuver, and I put one foot in, and
Yeah.
he's looking at me. He didn't say anything. I finally get in, and does he drive fast? He drives fucking fast.
Of
I mean,
course. Of
then
course, right?
he makes this left down Coldwater, then he makes a left on Ventura, and there's a Guitar Center right there.
Right.
He, skids into the parking lot. We go into the Guitar Center, and there was a couple of people in there. I walk in, and I see the clerk behind the counter. He sees us walk in, and he sees Ed, and I'm telling you, man, had the ghost of Jimi Hendrix and John Lennon walked through the door, he could not have been any more shocked. I thought this kid was going to fucking keel over.
I bet.
And,
What year was this? Like 86, 87, 85?
somewhere around there. So
Yeah.
it's not like he was like some little guy that,
Right.
and tells you so much about him. I don't think that Jeff Beck would ever go to a guitar store and buy his own strings, or
No,
Jimmy
right.
Page or David Gilmour. So we go, and he says, yeah, man, I need a set of Hughes Fenders. So instead of buying 10 sets, he buys one set. And he goes and he pulls his wallet out, and he's looking, and he goes, hey, man, can I borrow $10 for strings? We've just left his $20 million house, his $5 million studio, got into his $150,000 car, and he doesn't have $10 for strings. But again, him asking me, again, it tells you so much about him.
He's down to earth regardless of all of the.
Exactly.
He's just a dude. He's just a dude,
I thought
man.
it was amazing,
Yeah.
And then we're driving home. He goes, hey, man, can I borrow $10? I got to go get some beer. So he still owes me $20 for beer and guitar strings,
I thought he was going to tell you he wanted to go through In and Out or something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those little moments, to my mind, that nobody else ever experienced. I mean,
Yeah.
Alex did, and maybe but other writers never shared in those experiences because they weren't hanging out with him every day.
Did you get to see the band recording and rehearsing it all at 5150?
I never saw the band record.
Uh-huh.
I think that was kind of like Hallow Ground.
Yeah. Did you develop a relationship with the other guys in the band at all, or was it just pretty much Ed?
I got to know Al pretty well. I mean, he lived like 5 minutes from Edward. He actually lived between Edward and where I lived up in the Hollywood Hills. So several times I'd be up at 5150 and he would be there. And you recognized early on that Alex was the protective bigger brother, both physically and emotionally. Now, physically, I wasn't going to do anything to Edward. He would have.
Al's a tall dude. Al's a big guy, man. Yeah.
Big guy. But Edward was always sinewy and muscular, so not like I was going to ever pick a fight with him, which of course I never would have done.
Right.
But I never would have hurt Edward in any kind of an emotional way. Alex understood that. He sensed this friendship we had, and so I think he was very positive when I was around. And I write about it in the book, and I'm not going to give it away. But one time he calls, or maybe I was up at 5150. He says, "Hey man, you want to kind of go out on a double date with me and my girlfriend, and you and your girlfriend?" I go, "Sure, Al, I'd love to go out on a double date." So we go out on a double date, and that's an amazing chapter in the book. So I knew Al pretty well.
Do you have any contact with Al at all anymore?
I'm sorry?
Do you have any contact with anybody from the band now, or even Al? Okay. I just wonder what Al is extremely reclusive, and the band was always quiet, and I just didn't know if you had any insight on why Al is so. I guess there's really not much to. I mean, not that there's not much to say, but he's private.
Yeah. But, I mean, I think he said everything he was going to say in his book.
I interrupted you. You said something about Mike. You said you about Mike. You knew him a little bit.
Yeah, Mike, I knew a little bit. I ran into Mike at the concerts. When I was writing the book, when I was going to write the authorized biography back in '86, um, Mike kindly sat down with me, I think, again, over the course of 2 days. And we did a really lengthy interview for what was going to be the book, right? You know, a book on Edward Van Halen, you had to talk to the other band members.
Yeah.
So that's when I sat down and did this very extensive interview with Alex. That was incredible. I think it lasted 4 or 5 hours.
Nice.
That was amazing. I know he'd never done an interview that long. It was incredible. And the one with Mike, and you talk about friction between Edward and Dave. Mike despised Dave. I mean,
Wow. Wow.
Alex really hated Dave, but Mike got some of the stuff he said, and there was like,
Yeah.
wow.
It's safe to say when Sammy came in the band, they all liked Sammy.
Yeah,
Uh,
they did.
and did you get to know Sammy at all?
I actually knew Sammy before, way before he joined
I
Van
kind of
Halen.
figured, yeah.
I mean, I think I'd interviewed him. I know I interviewed him once, maybe twice. So I didn't really know him, but I had
Yeah.
met him a couple times before.
He's exactly the same way he comes off in interviews. Like if you ever, I've interacted with Sammy a couple times, and some people they say never meet your heroes. You know, that's one reason I really like the Van Hagar quote. You know, years is Sammy's a genuine dude. Say what you will about him marketing his merchandise and stuff. I mean, that's the business. But Sammy, maybe you've got a different perspective, but Sammy's a stand-up guy, man. I mean, everybody talks shit, and has their beefs with people, but that's my experience. Would you say the same thing regarding
Yeah, I mean,
him?
he was always very cool with me. I think I did probably one of the first interviews with Sammy and Edward for Guitar World magazine. That
Yeah,
would have been '86. But yeah, he was always very cool. Again, I didn't know him that well,
yeah,
and then in the book I write about uh, you know them him leaving Van Halen
yeah,
and what happened. I have Edward's story, and then there's Sammy's story. The truth, as it usually does, lies somewhere in the middle there.
yeah.
But I actually read Sammy's book way back in the day, and I thought it was a pretty honest book.
Yeah, me
Um,
too. Me too. Honesty hurts sometimes, but I think it's a little, slanted because you hear one side of the story, but I think it's pretty authentic. You know, I know we're a little limited on time, but I wanted to ask you a couple questions. You ended pretty much your tenure with the camp. '03 was about the end of the road for you, 2003. So in kind of a nutshell, what do you think was, in your opinion, was the deciding factor where things started to go wrong between Eddie and Sam? Was it just
um,
lifestyle differences and management changes and stuff?
the management change was a huge part of it.
Yeah, I've read
Uh,
that.
they got that new, and again, I write about this in the book. And I've talked to other crew guys who saw it as well. Ed Leffler, who was the manager when
Right.
Sammy came into the band, uh,
He died.
he
Yeah.
was right. He was really the glue. He
Hmm.
really understood the band. He passed away, and then they got the new manager in, and that's when things started falling apart. And it was right around that time, maybe a little earlier. I referenced earlier that I thought Edward started changing. And was it because there was a new manager around? I mean, that's a
Yeah.
huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Why did Edward and Sammy fall apart? I don't know, man.
Yeah.
It goes back to that respect thing. Edward wanted more from Sammy. I think Sammy's, again, I can't remember my chronology. Sammy's wife was pregnant, or
Yeah.
Sammy was off doing other things. Sammy wanted to pursue solo careers. Edward said, "You can't do that." I'll be honest with you. In the very beginning, Sammy still pursued his solo career when he
Right.
joined Van Halen. I thought that was insanity. I don't care what kind of a contract Sammy had. You can get out of any contract. As powerful as Van Halen was, it might have cost some money. You do not allow someone to come in and become the singer for your band and still pursue a solo career.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
it was what it says to me is I could be wrong. Obviously, Sammy loved the band. Is that Sammy wanted one foot in his solo career and he wanted one foot in Van Halen? I think that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Talk about disrespect. That's me, and it's never talked about. And ultimately, Edward's where the falling out was. Sammy really wanted to pursue the solo thing, and Edward was against it. Edward, basically
Yeah.
produced that first solo record or played bass or co-wrote
Right.
a song. He was all for it, and I couldn't understand it for the same reason I couldn't understand David Lee Roth coming back into the band after Sammy leaves.
That was a
Edward,
cat. Well, that was a cash grab, man, and they were grabbing at straws. You know what I'm saying? But that whole thing
maybe
broke. That
I
thing
don't
was.
could be. I don't think Edward really needed money at that point. I sometimes Edward took the path of least resistance, and I think I don't know.
I think a
Those
cash grab for the label, the business side, like
oh
not the band. Because
absolutely.
when Leffler died, he never would have done that. He let the band focus on what they do best and kept the business side business. And when you have the helm changes at the helm in the front office, in a band that's as powerful as Van Halen, they see dollar signs, and
Yeah,
the music industry eats its own, and destroys the art that gives it its platform to begin with. I mean, I could go on forever about that, and I won't. But yeah, and we talked about Eddie being a loyalist and him spending all of his time working on music, and that was his thing. And I can see where if you felt like maybe somebody in the band wasn't 100% in all the way, that might give you some kind of, you know, uh heartburn, so to speak, with Sammy doing solo stuff and then him wanting to spend time with his wife and baby, which makes sense if I'm Sammy too. I mean, I gotta be on both sides of the fence here, but knowing Eddie's personality and the things I've read, it makes sense. Plus, as fans and people, we see these personalities. We all love Mikey, we all love Al behind the drums, and for when we love Dave for what Dave did, he was the ultimate showman, and Eddie doing his stuff, and they're like superheroes, but they're real people, and there's people behind that. And I think when you're in a band situation like that, they are not able to step outside of that and see what the public views them as. And I guess where I'm going with this is they by the time the 95, 96 rolled around, they'd been doing this for 20 years. And they'd seen and done everything they possibly could do. They're different people and have different lives. And as fans, we see them as albums. These are the characters, these are the people. But it may take 3 years to put out a record. A lot of water goes under the bridge in those 3 years that you don't know about. And you're on a need to know basis, and you hear rumors and stories, and it's easy for us as fans to sit back and go, oh, Eddie this or Sammy this and Dave. We don't live it, and those aren't our lives. So as a musician, I understand that on a much lower level, but I've always been very forgiving and lenient as a fan of the band and always loyal to the band because I get that, and I hate and I certainly didn't want this interview to dwell on anything dark, but you went through '03 and you went through the Charone kind of phase, and you saw kind of Eddie take his dark turn a little bit. That must have been excruciating for you.
yeah, it was horrible. It was horrible, and all those things you mentioned. I mean, that's really what I wanted to bring to the book is sort of you can be a fly on the wall and you can really try and understand the dynamics between these people and a lot of stuff you never knew or you never saw. Edward would talk to me about. But yeah, 95, Gary Charone comes in, and it wouldn't have mattered who that singer was. There was no chance for that singer in Van Halen.
Right. It was dead in the water to begin with.
Fans would accept a second lead singer, but not
Right.
a third singer. And that's right around the time Edward changed. And 2003, our relationship kind of ends. And I don't want to give that away because
You got to read the book, right? Got to read the book.
it's in the book and there's context to it. Edward went through some darkness right around then. We've seen it, those
Yeah.
pictures and his playing and you, look, I hate to say this. Uh, People say, yeah, man, I saw the reunion tour, and or whenever they got back together after that, 2007, this and that, and Edward was great. I didn't see those tours because, to be honest, our relationship ended, and it didn't end on a positive note. So I really
Hmm.
tried to put Edward and our friendship out of my mind. But still, I mean, they
Yeah.
were being talked about a lot. Edward played well, during some of those tours, but nothing like this
Yeah.
fucking kid that he was in 78 or 79
Well, as
or
a
80.
guitar player myself, I mean, I don't play the way I did when I was 25. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Eddie, and I'm not disputing what you're saying. I agree with you, but he changed as a player. His tone, his style of playing his guitars, he was always changing, and he evolved to what he was in '07, for better
Yeah,
or worse, whether you like it or you don't. I'm with you. I don't like the Van Halen tone after he went to Peavey. Not that Peaveys are bad, but the 5150 and that style is just, I like the raw fire,
yeah,
the gritty fight for it tone and fly by the seat of your pants, and you're tying your shoe on with a shoestring that's been broke 4 times, but it still works and it's rock and roll. You know what I'm saying? That's the analogy, and or Eddie would say you fall down the stairs and land on your feet. I mean, everyone uses that quote, but that's relatable as fans. We know what that's like, especially if you're a guitar player or a musician or any type of artist, whether you're a photographer or a writer. It's when you're hungry, and it's almost like you're a fan yourself and you're still a musician. You're creating. You're still inspired.
right.
Yeah, but yeah, it was. I saw the '04 tour and I had backstage passes and all access, and it was cool. But I didn't realize, lack of internet and publicity. You didn't really realize a lot of stuff till later on, and we had a great time. But the show was, eh. I saw that tour 3 times in '04 with Sammy. And I saw him in '07 and 2012, and I just couldn't take Dave, on those tours after, but nothing against the Van Halen camp. Um, just wasn't my cup of tea. But let's, I guess, but I'm glad Eddie was able to recover. We'll end this on a positive note, and Eddie was, and I thank Wolfgang for doing everything he did to get Eddie back on. I feel that Wolfgang had a big role in that, and that's my opinion. And at least Eddie had his health back, and uh, he didn't go out. He went out on a good note, I would say. I'll leave it at that. Uh, let's talk real quick before this Zoom call forces us to end. Tone Chaser is your book. Obviously, it's been out a couple years. I'm going to be doing a giveaway on the channel. So if you comment on this video and any future videos up until July 15th, I'm going to give a copy of Tone Chaser away to one of my viewers, and I'm going to ship it out for free. And so comment in this video or comment on any of my future videos after this. And I will pick a random comment and announce the winner on the 15th. Get you a copy of Tone Chaser. And if you order Tone Chaser from the website, I'll put the links in the description below and in my future videos. If you order it, you said if they mention that they ordered your book, you'll get them a audio book for free.
If if they mention that they've watched your podcast
Mm-hmm.
or watched us talk about this, and just when you order on my webpage, tonechaserbook.com, you can write to me. You can write comments. Just say, hey man, I saw you talking about if I order the book from you on the Marty Pelto show, you'll send me the free audiobook. So just you have to let me know about that, and I'll send you a free audiobook, which you'll freaking love because it's embedded with all
Awesome.
of the original interviews I
Yeah.
did with Edward. So it's me narrating the main parts, but all those interviews that you're going to read in the book you're going to now hear Edward's voice and him jamming and him playing through Les Pauls, through my Marshall, and rattling the pictures off the walls. And he bought two
Wonderful.
Les Pauls. So
That's
yeah,
so cool.
all good. So
I'll put
just
all
mention
those
it.
links. Yeah, just mention it when you buy it from him on his
Yeah,
website, tonechaser.com, right?
ToneChaserBook.com.
Tonechaserbook.com, link in the description. And again, comment on this video and my future videos. We're going to do a giveaway on the 15th. I've read a little bit of the book so far. This is a fantastic read. Uh, Steve, before we get cut off, I really want to thank you for doing this interview with me today and taking your time. I'd like to schedule maybe a part two, or we have more time to talk about maybe after the giveaway. If you want to do this again, I'd love to have you back on and we can dig into some more details and cover things. There's so much I would still have to ask you and would love to hear. Is that okay?
Man, anytime.
All
You
right.
know where to find me.
Perfect, man. Well, thank you. Thank you again. And I know my viewers are excited to have you on here. Um, and have a good rest of your day, man. We'll talk soon, okay?
Go, man. See you, everybody.
Bye. Peace out.